The stars hung silently over the endless black sea of space, distant and cold, watching as the Galactic Empire's fleet drifted into position. It was supposed to be a simple show of force. A rebel planet on the edge of the Empire had dared to deny their tribute, and now 20 of the Empire's finest warships were here to teach them a brutal lesson. On the bridge of the flagship Vrelos, High Commander Setar lounged lazily in his chair, half bored. His golden armor gleamed under the soft blue lights, and his violet skin, a mark of nobility among the Yvaran, was flawless. He smirked as he tapped a long silver claw against the armrest. "Any resistance detected?" he asked lazily. "None, Commander," replied his aide, bowing. "The planet's defenses are outdated. They're barely scratching the surface of our shields. The cleansing will be swift." Setar barely nodded. It was beneath him to worry about such insects. Yet, even as he relaxed, a ripple of unease spread through the bridge. It was small at first, a slight flicker on the radar screens, a blip that shouldn't be there. "Status?" he asked, frowning. The sensors officer looked pale. "Unidentified object appearing on long-range scanners. It's big, sir. Really big." Setar straightened in his seat. "Is it one of ours?" "No, sir. No transponder codes. And it wasn't there before. It just appeared." Before Setar could snap out another order, the object completed its arrival. The vast emptiness ahead of them twisted and shimmered, like a cloth being pulled back. Out of that ripple, a massive, angular ship pushed its way into real space. It was ugly, no elegant curves or graceful designs like the Empire's fleet, just brutal slabs of black and gray metal welded into a monstrous thing that screamed pure function over form. Silence fell across the Vrelos. Even the automated battle alerts seemed to choke on the sight. Then the readings came in. "Sir," the sensors officer whispered, "it's a warship, human-made." Setar's mind reeled. Humans? He had studied them in his youth, a savage, dying species from a forgotten blue planet far from the Empire's centers. Crude, weak, barely intelligent. How could they be here, in his space? "Impossible," he hissed. "Destroy it, now." The Empire's fleet moved as one, training every weapon they had on the unknown ship. Bright lances of plasma, kinetic slugs the size of small buildings, particle beams, everything opened fire in a deafening barrage, and yet the human warship didn't even flinch. The shots exploded against an invisible barrier, barely scratching its dark surface. Slowly, the human ship turned, not in panic, not even in hurry, but in a way that felt almost lazy, almost bored. On the bridge of the Vrelos, the officers began to panic. "Shields unaffected, Commander. They're laughing at us." A voice crackled over their comms, deep and calm, speaking in a language Setar didn't know, but somehow he felt the meaning crawl straight into his bones. "Surrender or be erased." For the first time in his long career, High Commander Setar felt a cold, creeping fear. He realized something terrible then. This wasn't a rebel planet calling for help. This wasn't an accident. The humans had come here on purpose. Setar's mind raced. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Around him, the bridge officers were a mess, shouting over each other, fumbling at consoles, desperately trying to find a way to fight something that clearly wasn't playing by their rules. Another order barked out of his throat, more instinct than thought. "Full retreat. Form defensive pattern Theta 7. The fleet tried. Engines flared to life. The sleek Imperial warships pivoted and spun into their practiced retreat formation, shields overlapping, weapons ready to cover each other as they pulled back toward safer ground. It was textbook. Perfect. But the human ship moved faster. Without warning, it accelerated. No elegant burn of engines, No warning at all. It simply shifted, a sudden, brutal motion that felt more like teleportation than propulsion. One moment it was far away. The next, it was in the middle of the Imperial fleet. Then came the slaughter. Bright lines of light, not plasma, not anything they had ever seen, lanced out from hidden ports across the human ship's armor. Each beam picked a target with surgical precision. One by one, the Empire's proud ships exploded into clouds of fire and debris, like toys being smashed under an invisible hammer. Setar watched helplessly as his second-in-command's ship, the Jakarith, was sliced neatly in half. He barely even had time to scream before the communication feed from his ship cut out, replaced by static. On the bridge of the Vrelos, the temperature seemed to drop. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. The human ship spoke again, its voice steady, almost disappointed. "You were warned." Setar slammed his fist against the control panel. "Open a channel, now!" The comms officer scrambled, hands shaking so badly he could barely press the buttons. Somehow, a connection opened, a shaky, distorted image appearing on the bridge's main screen. The face that stared back at Setar was not what he expected. It was human, yes, but not savage, not primitive. The woman wore a simple black uniform, no decoration, no badges, just cold efficiency. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and worst of all, she looked utterly calm, like this was just another day at work. "This is High Commander Sator of the Empire," he said, forcing his voice to stay firm. "You are in Imperial territory. Identify yourself." The human woman tilted her head slightly, almost curious. "You first fired upon us," she said. "You attacked without provocation. Your laws mean nothing." "This is an act of war," Setar barked. "No," she said, almost kindly. "This is a reckoning." Behind her, Setar noticed other humans moving, calm, efficient, preparing something. His heart thudded harder against his ribs. "What do you want?" he asked, the words tasting like ash. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was pity, like she was looking at a creature too stupid to understand why it was about to die. "Nothing," she said. "We're just cleaning up a mess. You should have left Earth alone." Setar opened his mouth to protest. They hadn't touched Earth in centuries. But it didn't matter. He saw it in her eyes. This wasn't about negotiations. There would be no peace talks, no chance to surrender and survive. The human warship shifted again. Around it, tiny dark shapes spilled into space, drones, hundreds of them, spreading like a black mist across the stars. The Empire's command wasn't frozen anymore. They were about to be wiped out. The drones moved like a living creature, a massive school of dark metal sharks swimming through the void. Each one was small, barely the size of a fighter craft, but their movements were too coordinated, too perfect. There was no hesitation, no fear, no wasted motion. They knew exactly what they were doing. Setar's bridge crew broke completely. Officers abandoned their posts, some trying to run, even though there was nowhere to go. One threw off his headset and slammed his fist against the walls, screaming something about gods and death. Another curled up under a console, sobbing like a child. Setar felt a burning rage bubbling inside him, but it was hollow. Powerless. "Fire everything," he roared. "Target the drones, target the ship. I don't care, just fight." The Vrelos obeyed. Its cannons roared, the deck vibrated under the fury of its barrage. Brilliant beams of death speared into the swarm of drones, and missed. Or rather, it didn't matter even when they hit. The drones twisted and turned mid-flight, impossibly fast, weaving between the blasts. A few were destroyed, yes, but the swarm barely noticed. Within seconds, they were on the Empire's ships. The first drone latched onto the nearest cruiser, cutting into the hull with a light so bright it hurt to look at. The second followed. then 10 more. The ship struggled, shields flaring, but it was like trying to stop a hurricane with a bedsheet. Within moments, the cruiser's engines overloaded. A second later, the ship exploded, a brief, fiery funeral in the cold dark. Satar watched it happen, helpless. He slammed his fist again onto his console, shattering the screen. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "They're humans. They're supposed to be inferior." Nobody answered him. The woman's voice echoed again across the comms, calm and cold as winter. "You enslaved our people. You took our children. You thought we were broken." "We remember." Satar stumbled back a step, the words hitting him harder than any weapon. His memory flashed, unbidden, to the old history scrolls, the ones nobody bothered reading anymore. A footnote about some backwater species that had rebelled centuries ago, easily crushed, forgotten like so many others. Their planet classified as burned and abandoned. Except they hadn't been crushed, they hadn't been forgotten, they had survived, and now they had come back. The Vrelos rocked hard, throwing Satar to the deck. Sirens wailed, the power flickered. He tasted blood in his mouth. "Report!" he barked, crawling back to his feet. The surviving officer, a young male barely out of cadet training, turned to him, his eyes wide with terror. "They've breached the lower decks! Intruders! Human soldiers! Boarding parties!" A deafening explosion cut him off. The deck beneath them buckled, metal screamed, a wall tore open, venting atmosphere, and 2 armored figures stepped through the breach. Humans, but not like the ones Satar remembered. These were giants, clad in bulky black armor that hummed with power. Their faces were hidden behind brutal helmets, and heavy weapons hung from their arms like extensions of their own bodies. One pointed straight at Satar. The last thing he saw before diving for cover was the barrel of a gun the size of a cannon, glowing bright with energy. And then, the blast hit the bridge like a hammer. The console next to Satar exploded into shards of burning metal, showering him with sparks. His armor saved his life, but the force still threw him across the room like a broken toy. He landed hard, the air knocked from his lungs, pain exploding through his ribs. Through watering eyes, he saw the humans step fully onto the bridge. No hesitation, no fear. They moved with mechanical precision, sweeping the room with their weapons. The first officer to react, a brave soul named Arvel, lunged at them with a plasma pistol, screaming in rage. He didn't even get close. A single shot from one of the humans caught him square in the chest. His armor folded inward like paper, and he crumpled silently to the floor, a thin line of smoke rising from the hole in his body. The bridge fell into total silence, except for the crackle of damaged electronics and the soft hum of the human soldiers' weapons. Satar tried to rise, but something was wrong with his leg. Pain shot up from his knee. Broken. He bit back a scream and dragged himself behind a wrecked console, panting hard. "Commander Satar," a voice said. He froze. It wasn't the cold, metallic growl of the armored soldiers. It was her, the woman from the communications. Her voice, clear and unhurried, now filled the ruined bridge. Satar forced himself to look up. A third figure stepped through the breach. Her. No helmet, no armor except a simple black uniform, though the faint shimmer around her suggested a personal shield of some kind. Her short-cropped hair framed a face that should have been beautiful, if not for the sharpness in her eyes. "You should be proud," she said, walking toward him without fear. "You get to witness the end of your empire's arrogance firsthand." Satar bared his teeth. "You think you can kill us all? There will be reinforcements. You'll burn for this." The woman crouched down a few feet away from him, close enough that Satar could see the faint scars lining her knuckles, scars that spoke of countless battles fought and survived. "Reinforcements?" she echoed, almost laughing. You still think you matter?" Satar swallowed thickly. His heart was thundering in his ears. "You have no idea what's happening outside this little fleet of yours," she continued. "You think you're just unlucky, that you stumbled across some ancient human relic, some leftover bit of rage." She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not special, Satar. Right now, this very second, every Imperial stronghold near human space is burning. Your academies, your shipyards, your slave colonies." Satar's stomach twisted into a tight, icy knot. "No," he croaked. "That's not possible." The woman rose to her full height again, towering over him. Her soldiers stood like statues behind her, their weapons steady but silent. "It's already done," she said simply. Satar felt the floor tilt under him. The room spun. He thought about the thousands of Imperial citizens under his command, the beautiful cities built on the bones of 100 conquered worlds, the massive golden statues of the emperors that had stared down at him his entire life, promising eternal rule. Gone. All gone. He realized now, too late, that they had underestimated the humans not because of weakness, but because of pride. Humans had been beaten once, and they had learned. They had hidden. They had grown stronger in the shadows, where no Imperial census, no scout patrols ever dared to look. And when they returned, they hadn't come for negotiation. They had come for vengeance. Satar coughed, tasting blood. His hands clenched into fists. "What now?" he snarled. "You gonna execute me like a dog?" The woman studied him for a moment, her face unreadable. "No," she said. "You're going to live. You're going to go back to your masters and tell them what you saw today. Tell them that humanity is not a memory. Tell them we are not your slaves, not your playthings." She turned her back on him casually, walking toward the breach again. "You will tell them," she said over her shoulder, "that the age of the Empire is over." Satar watched, helpless, as she and her soldiers stepped back into the void, vanishing into the swirling mass of drones that darkened the stars. He lay there, broken and beaten, surrounded by the burning wreckage of his ship, and for the first time in his life, Satar wept. Not for himself, but for everything he knew was about to come. The Vrelos floated adrift, a shattered corpse among the ruins of what had once been the Empire's proud fleet. Fires smoldered inside the broken hull. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp, metallic tang of blood. Emergency klaxons still wailed uselessly, a sad echo in a ship with no hope left. Satar stumbled through the wreckage, dragging his useless leg behind him. His vision blurred, and every breath burned in his chest, but he forced himself onward. He had to survive. He had to carry the message. It was the only thing left he could do. The survivors, if there were any, needed a leader, someone to tell them that not all was lost, even if deep down he knew it was a lie. He reached the emergency hangar after what felt like an eternity. The doors were half closed, warped and scorched, but still barely operational. Satar slammed his palm against the access panel. Sparks flew. The doors groaned but obeyed, scraping open just wide enough for him to slip through. Inside, chaos reigned. Shuttles lay overturned or destroyed. A few soldiers and officers, maybe 24, huddled near one of the few functioning transports, patching wounds and trying not to look at the bodies littering the bay. Their armor was scorched, dented, and bloodied. Their eyes were hollow. When Satar limped into view, a murmur spread through them. They straightened a little, almost out of reflex, like broken statues remembering they had once been proud. "Commander!" one of them cried, rushing forward to support him. "You're alive!" "Alive!" Satar rasped. "For now." The soldier, a young woman with half her face burned raw, helped him toward the shuttle. Satar collapsed inside, gasping. His body screamed in protest, but he clenched his teeth and ignored it. Pain was irrelevant now. "How many made it?" he asked. "Maybe 50 total, across all surviving vessels," she said grimly. "Most of the fleet. Gone." Satar closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of it settling on him like a mountain. "Get us out of here," he ordered. "Now." The transport shuddered as it lifted off. Through the cracked viewport, Satar saw the battlefield stretch out before them. What had been a grand armada hours ago was now just wreckage, broken ships, drifting bodies, shattered dreams. The human warship loomed in the distance, utterly unharmed, like a black tombstone floating above the Empire's grave. No pursuit came as they fled, no parting shots, no threats. The humans didn't need to. Their message had already been delivered loud and clear. As the shuttle cleared the wreckage field and slipped into faster-than-light travel, Satar allowed himself a moment of stillness. His mind spun, trying to grasp the scale of what he had seen. It was one thing to lose a battle. Armies fell, ships were destroyed. That was the nature of war. But this? This was something else. This was annihilation. He thought about the Empress, sitting in her golden throne room, surrounded by sycophants who fed her lies about how powerful and invincible the Empire was. How humans were nothing but an afterthought, a dead race rotting on the edge of the galaxy. They would not believe him. Not at first. He would be called a coward, a traitor. They would accuse him of fabricating some wild story to cover up his failure. But it wouldn't matter. Because soon, humanity wouldn't just be at their doorstep. They would be inside the Empire, tearing it apart from within. Satar opened his eyes and stared at the flickering star lines outside the viewport. Somewhere out there, humanity was moving. Quiet. Patient. Unstoppable. He wondered how many more fleets were already gone, how many more governors had already fallen under the silent, merciless hands of the humans. He thought about the woman, her scarred hands, her pitiless eyes. She hadn't hated him personally. There was no passion in her voice, no rage, just the cold certainty of a people who had been crushed once and had sworn never to be crushed again. Satar shivered. Not from the cold, but from the terrible understanding that had rooted itself deep in his soul. The humans didn't want conquest. They wanted justice. And nothing the Empire had built, not their ships, not their armies, not even their gods, could save them now. The shuttle rattled slightly as it neared the Empire's nearest listening post. Satar straightened his blood-stained uniform as best he could. His leg screamed in protest. His ribs felt like broken glass grinding with every breath. But he ignored it all. He had a message to deliver, and no matter how much they hated hearing it, they would listen. Or they, too, would burn. The listening post floated in space like a barnacle clinging to the side of a dying whale. A forgotten station, manned by the lowest-ranked officers in the Empire, a place where nothing ever happened and where nothing was supposed to. Today, that would change. Satar's shuttle docked with a bone-rattling thud. He was the first to limp out, flanked by the few surviving soldiers who could still walk. His armor was still scorched, his face drawn and pale, but he held himself upright by sheer force of will. Inside the station, confusion reigned. The dockmaster, a squat man with more chins than medals, bustled toward them, barking orders. "You can't just dock without clearance. Identify yourself immediately. Where's your authorization?" Satar didn't even slow down. He shoved the dockmaster aside with a snarl and marched straight toward the main command center, his soldiers scattering the few guards that tried to get in his way. It took minutes, long, agonizing minutes, but finally he stood before the station's main transmission console. He slapped a bloodied hand against the controls. "Priority 1 broadcast," he rasped. To Imperial Command, all channels. The comms officer, a nervous boy who couldn't have been more than 20, looked up, hesitating. But, sir, Priority 1 is only for confirmed extinction-level events or the death of... Satar grabbed him by the collar and dragged him close until their faces nearly touched. This is an extinction-level event, he growled. The boy paled and activated the channel without another word. The holographic transmitters sparked to life, connecting Satar directly to the Imperial War Council, a collection of admirals, governors, and lords, all lounging in their rich silks and polished armor, utterly unprepared for the sight that greeted them. Satar stood before them, bloody, burned, broken. Silence fell across the council chamber, heavy and uncomfortable. The Grand Admiral, a pompous old reptile named Vrax, was the first to recover. "Commander Satar," he sneered, "explain yourself. Why have you—" Satar cut him off with a snarl. "The human threat is real," he said, voice rough but steady. "We engaged an unknown human warship near the rebel sector. It annihilated our fleet." Murmurs rippled through the council. Disbelief. Mockery. "A single ship?" Vrax said, his lip curling. "You lost an entire fleet to a primitive ghost story?" "It wasn't just a ship," Satar snapped. "It was an execution. They have technology we can't match, weapons we can't defend against. They wiped us out like we were nothing. And worse—" He paused, his fists clenching at his sides. "Worse, they are organized. They're not scattered savages. They're coordinated. They're coming for us." The Grand Admiral laughed. Actually laughed, a deep, wet chuckle that echoed off the marble pillars of the council chamber. "You expect us to believe fairy tales? That humans, of all creatures, could threaten the might of the Empire?" Satar took a step closer to the projector. "They are already burning your colonies," he said. "While you sit here fat and blind, your outer systems are falling. Your governors are dying in their beds. Your fleets are being carved up like prey." Another lord, more cautious, leaned forward. "Why didn't we detect their movements? Why wasn't there warning?" Satar's smile was grim and hollow. "Because they learned from us. They know how we think, how we fight. They know our patrol routes, our blind spots. They knew exactly when and where to strike." Disbelief warred with fear across the faces of the council. Vrax sneered again, but it was less certain now. "Suppose what you say is true," he said slowly. "Suppose these humans are rising. What would you have us do, Commander? Surrender? Bow before animals?" Satar straightened, despite the pain that racked his body. "No," he said coldly. "You fight, but not the way you're used to. Not with arrogance, not with speeches about destiny and bloodlines." He locked eyes with each member of the council. "You fight like animals yourselves. You adapt, you survive, or you die screaming." The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. The Empress herself, a towering woman draped in flowing gold robes, finally spoke, her voice calm but deadly. "Very well, Satar," she said. "If what you say is true, then humanity will remember what it means to challenge the Empire." Satar said nothing, because he already knew. It wasn't humanity that needed to remember. It was the Empire. And soon, they would. One way or another. The Empire moved fast after Satar's warning, faster than he had ever seen in his lifetime. War factories roared to life. New fleets were hammered together with brutal urgency. Old alliances were called in, and conscripts were dragged from their homes by the millions. But it didn't matter. The humans had already taken the initiative. They had spent decades, maybe centuries, preparing for this. By the time the first Imperial counteroffensive launched, the humans were already deep inside Imperial space. Planets that had never seen war in living memory were suddenly burning, their skies choked with smoke. Communications blacked out. Supply lines collapsed overnight. It wasn't a war. It was a dismantling. Piece by piece, world by world, the Empire was being taken apart. Sator stood aboard the bridge of a new ship, the Valakryth, hastily built, barely tested, and watched another report flicker across the holographic table. Another loss, another world gone. A junior officer ran up, pale and shaking. "Commander, they've hit Maver Prime. The 4th and 5th fleets, gone. No survivors." Sator didn't even flinch. He simply nodded, as if the boy had told him it was raining. "Send a message to command," he said. "Tell them Maver Prime is lost." The officer hesitated. "Commander, how long can we keep this up?" Sator met his eyes. There was no anger there, no false hope either. "Not long," he said simply. The bridge fell silent. Everyone had known it, deep down. Now it was simply spoken aloud. The Valakryth shuddered as it jumped toward the next defense point. Sator stood alone near the viewing window, watching the stars blur into streaks of light. He thought about the Empire, the way it had grown fat and complacent, drunk on its own lies, how it had ruled with iron fists and sharpened words, how it had crushed voices under its boots without ever looking down to see who they belonged to. And now, all those ghosts had come back. Humanity had risen not just with weapons, but with memory. A memory of every insult, every injustice, every forgotten corpse buried under imperial cities. Sator could almost feel them now, moving through the darkness, patient and unstoppable, a tide that could not be reasoned with or bribed. They didn't want to rule the Empire. They wanted to tear it down brick by bloody brick, and they were winning. The Valakryth snapped out of faster-than-light travel, and the defensive line came into view, or what was left of it. Charred wreckage floated in the blackness. Burning ships spun aimlessly, their crews long dead. The humans were there, waiting. This time it wasn't just one warship. Hundreds of human vessels hung in formation, not sleek and beautiful like the Empire's ships, but ugly, brutal, efficient. Their hulls were scarred and patched, covered in strange weapons and strange armor. Each one bore the mark of a different lost colony, different survivors, different kinds of vengeance. Sator's heart tightened. The humans had unified. They weren't scattered tribes anymore. They were a storm. The first human ship moved, a massive dreadnought shaped like a blade, and the Empire's remaining forces tried to hold. They fought hard. They fought bravely. But bravery meant nothing now. Human guns tore through shields like they weren't even there. Boarding pods smashed into Imperial hulls and disgorged soldiers in that same black armor, unstoppable, merciless. Sator watched it unfold, feeling helpless all over again. He knew it was only a matter of time before they reached the Valakryth too. And when they did, he would meet them, not as a coward, not begging for mercy, but standing. He turned to his officers. "Prepare to repel boarders," he said, voice cold and clear. "We hold the line. We make them bleed." They saluted him, grim and determined. None of them believed they would survive. That wasn't the point anymore. It was about making the humans remember too, remember that even in its death throes, the Empire would not fall quietly. The first impact rocked the ship. The second tore through the outer hull. Sirens wailed. Sator drew his plasma blade from his side, feeling its familiar hum vibrate up his arm. "They're coming," he whispered. And this time, he would be ready. The first explosion tore through the corridor outside the bridge. The walls buckled inward, smoke and sparks flooding the air. Sator tightened his grip on the plasma blade, his muscles coiled and ready. All around him, the last of the Valakryth's crew braced themselves behind overturned consoles and makeshift barricades. There was no speech, no rallying cry. They all knew what this was. Not a battle, but a final stand. Heavy footsteps echoed down the ruined hallways, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The humans were coming. A second blast rocked the door. Cracks split down its center. Then with a screech of tearing metal, it buckled inward, and the human soldiers stormed through. They moved like a force of nature. Black armored titans, weapons blazing. The first volley shredded the barricades, cutting down 3 of Setar's men instantly. No hesitation. No mercy. Setar roared and charged. He met the first soldier head-on, swinging his blade in a brutal arc. It caught the human across the shoulder, sending up a shower of sparks as it bit into the armor. But the human didn't even stagger. He swung a massive fist into Setar's chest, sending him flying backward into the wall with a bone-crunching thud. Pain exploded through Setar's body. He forced himself up anyway, spitting blood onto the deck. Around him, the fight raged. His officers fought with a kind of desperate fury that made Setar's heart ache. Plasma pistols flared, blades clashed, blood, both violet and red, splattered the steel walls. But the humans fought like machines, like they had no fear of death. Every step forward was another life lost, every breath another meter of ground ceded. And still, they came. Setar lunged again, this time ducking under a human's swing and driving his blade up into the gap between armor plates. The human jerked, shuddered, then collapsed. One. Just one. Setar barely had time to catch his breath before another soldier was on him. He fought blindly, ferociously, not for victory, not even for survival, but for the right to say he hadn't surrendered, that he hadn't died begging. Another soldier fell, then another. But Setar's strength was fading. A blast caught him across the side, spinning him to the deck. His plasma blade skittered away, out of reach. He rolled onto his back just in time to see a towering human soldier standing over him, weapon raised. Setar stared up at him, breathing hard. He didn't flinch, didn't beg. He only spat a bloody smile. "Do it!" he rasped. The soldier hesitated, just for a second, then lowered his weapon slightly. A voice crackled through his comms. "Hold!" The human soldier stepped aside, and through the smoke walked her, the woman from the first battle, her black uniform unmarked by the carnage around her. She knelt beside Setar, her face impassive. "You fought well," she said quietly. Setar barked a bitter laugh. "And still lost." She nodded once. "Yes, you lost." He struggled to lift himself, every bone screaming. Blood dripped from his mouth. His vision swam. "Kill me," he said, "or you'll regret it." The woman shook her head. "You're more valuable alive." Setar narrowed his eyes. "To gloat?" "No," she said. "To tell the others. To carry the truth back through the dying heart of your empire. You will be the witness." Setar coughed, nearly laughing again at the absurdity. "And if I refuse—" She leaned closer, her voice almost gentle. "You won't." She rose to her feet, nodding to her soldiers. They grabbed Setar's broken body and lifted him roughly to his feet. He didn't resist. There was no point. As they dragged him through the wrecked bridge of the Valakrith, he saw what was left of his crew. Dead, dying, defeated. The Empire's best. Gone. Setar didn't look away. He forced himself to burn the images into his mind, so that when he spoke, he would speak with the full weight of this day behind his words. He would be their witness, their warning. As the humans secured the ship, planting strange black devices along its walls, Setar realized what was coming next. They weren't capturing it. They were going to erase it. The Valakrith, the battle, the deaths, all wiped clean, as if they had never existed. It wasn't enough to defeat the Empire. The humans would erase every trace of its victories, its pride, its very memory. Setor was pushed roughly into a human dropship, the door sealing shut behind him. Through the viewport, he watched the Valakrith explode in a silent bloom of light, one final furious flash, and then nothing. Only darkness, and the long road ahead to a broken empire that no longer ruled anything except its own ashes.